how a single fast food meal is worse for your health than smoking a cigarette. So I suppose we could start with a claim that we came across where an individual was talking about how a single fast food meal is worse for your health than smoking a cigarette, or at least that's the interpretation. That's what we heard a lot of people talking about and got some questions on. So first of all, I guess, is this true, yes or no? Should you be eating fast food or smoking or both?
Probably shouldn't be doing either one of those things. It's a weird discussion because they're talking about a single instance of two things that are very clearly detrimental for your health in the long run. But it's kind of the same idea. What is worse? Taking a punch to the liver or a punch to the head. Taking one is probably not going to make a clinically significant effect in any way. However, if you do either one of those things in the long run, they're going to be cumulatively, exponentially bad for your health.
Yeah, and there is data out there with these predominantly high-fat meals, ultra-processed foods, that does show associations both in the short term and the long term with elevations in C-reactive protein. And I don't know that necessarily getting caught up in the nuance of how long that takes to return to baseline, versus a cigarette. How long is that going to increase C-reactive protein when there's tons of chemicals in there that have tons of different effects?
Yeah.
And we know that over the long term, both of these things are going to be detrimental to health. Mm-hmm. So it sort of, everyone likes to compare things to smoking. You could even compare the rate of like atherosclerosis in someone with severe dyslipidemia, genetic, gain of function PSCK9 mutation. They're actually going to have worse atherosclerosis than your average smoker. So, comparing things to smoking is sort of a benchmark just when you're talking about hazard ratios and the dangers of things. But you can't necessarily take that subjective feeling. How do most people feel after a fast food meal? While you're eating it, you're going to feel pretty good because the food is very tasty. But then afterwards, you're typically going to have a bit of a brain fog or a slump. Not everybody, but most people, it's like, oh, I need to take a nap now. If you think about people after Thanksgiving, everyone wants to go sit down and just watch the football game, and maybe grandpa falls asleep. But with a cigarette, most people are going to have a bit of a boost in mood because it has some of those antidepressant effects, which I don't know get talked about a whole lot, but it is a mild monoamine oxidase inhibitor.
Mm-hmm. Nicotine and smoking cigarettes in general is a tough one because in a lot of cases, right when you stop, you have transiently worsening of cognitive function, and you also just don't feel as good in general. So it is therapeutic, arguably significantly more therapeutic than something like alcohol. But in the long run, it's detrimental. And there's so many other better stimulants or even nicotine receptor agonists, cholinergic nootropics that you can use other than nicotine. And that being said, if you're just going to use nicotine one time, we get this question from time to time, like what about a nicotine gum, or what about even a nicotine vape, or an ultra low dose of nicotine? And infrequently, that's really not going to be deleterious for your health, but it can also be quite addictive, especially if you're tempted to slowly increase the dose because you notice that beneficial function. So I think a slippery slope argument is valid for nicotine use.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's addictive. That's on the labels of any nicotine products now. So I think that's a good step in public health policy. And there are some people, maybe they can take nicotine once per week, a 1 or 2 milligram lozenge, something like that, and they're able to sustain that. Yeah. And other people are going to go down that slope, as you talked about. They're like, well, maybe I'll use it twice a week, or I'll use it 2 days in a row, just this once. And then that sort of snowballs into, all of a sudden you're using these products much more than you would have initially intended to. And then, I think that could, it doesn't seem like a typical case, but I guess that could be a gateway to, using actual tobacco products if the tobacco products are going to have a more potent effect than just a nicotine product, just because the other chemicals there It's like a super nicotine, but not in a positive way. And when people ask us about cognitive optimization or brain fog, usually there's something either in their metabolic health or their lifestyle that is the rate limiting step. It's not a deficiency of nicotine.
Yeah, that's true. So it can cover up a different lifestyle factor that can be optimized.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense to use nicotine, for example, if you are just getting crap sleep. And sleep, again, is one of those other things that comes down to lifestyle. But if you're not sleeping well, then your cognitive performance is not going to be where it needs to be.
Is nicotine a good option to optimize your REM sleep?
No. Nicotine, if someone was going to use this, probably should be used very early in the day. I would not use it at night. It's going to have a negative impact on your sleep quality, sleep architecture, your REM sleep, all those sorts of metrics.
Mm-hmm. One other note is even on sleep trackers, some of them can get a general idea of how your REM sleep is, but it's not particularly accurate.
Yeah, and the REM sleep and your calories burned on those fitness trackers, whether it's a Fitbit, Apple Watch, Samsung, whatever you're using, those metrics aren't particularly accurate. They'll get you in the ballpark, but they do seem to be fairly accurate for heart rate, which is why they've got a lot of positive press for detecting things like atrial fibrillation, or if people are monitoring their heart rate during exercise, they actually are fairly accurate for those things.
Yep, great for heart rate variability as well, which is arguably the most helpful marker to look at your biometric data.